Hi everyone. Tonight we settle into a kind of evening you wouldn't wish even on a coworker you barely tolerate. Picture yourself walking across a medieval field, snow crunching under your boots, each breath drifting out like a faint ghost. Your shoulders throb beneath armor already chilled to the core, and your fingers flex inside stiff leather gloves. Ahead lies the camp, a scatter of wavering lights and the faint scent of wood smoke. And you know you're only moments away from the one place a soldier could drop after marching all day. The tent. But before we step inside, here's a friendly reminder. You likely wouldn't last long out here without a serious amount of luck. The human body simply isn't built for hours of freezing temperatures while wrapped in rough wool. So before you settle in, take a second to like the video and subscribe, but only if you truly enjoy the content. And while you're here, share your location and local time in the comments. I always enjoy seeing when and where you're watching from. Now, dim the lights and follow me into this world. As you reach the camp, the glow of the fires feels like a fragile promise. Medieval armies did carry tents, but they were nothing like the waterproof nylon shelters we use today. These were large canvas or heavy linen coverings stretched over wooden poles, sometimes patched with leather. When you duck inside, you're greeted by the smell of damp wool, smoke, and worn-out bodies. The tent is low, forcing you to crouch. Your armor clinks as you lower yourself onto the ground, which feels half frozen or half mud depending on whether it snowed or rained. Here's an important point. Medieval campaigns often pushed into late autumn or even deep winter, not because commanders wanted to torment their troops, but because wars didn't follow weather schedules. Chroniclers from the 100 Years' War described soldiers holding out through December, their tents drooping under ice. And this wasn't limited to Northern Europe. Armies in the Balkans and on the steppe faced nights where the wind could snap ropes like thread. Here's a curious detail. Many soldiers claimed their best insulation came not from the tent above, but from what they laid beneath themselves. Branches, hay, even discarded shields arranged flat to lift them off frozen ground. Think of it as a medieval version of a modern sleeping pad. A knight's squire might spread cut rushes neatly, while common soldiers grabbed whatever dry material they could find. But here's where historians disagree. How well did these tents actually protect soldiers during brutal winter nights? Some accounts say the canvas was so thin that snow drifted through the seams, soaking men until they abandoned the tent for the fires outside. Other reports insist that, with enough layers of hides and cloaks, a tent could trap a surprising amount of warmth, especially when crowded with men shoulder to shoulder. It's a classic historical debate. Were these shelters mostly symbolic or genuine tools for survival? You sit in the dim light, listening to muffled voices as others settle in. The wind claws at the canvas walls, each gust making the ropes creak and the stakes strain in the ground. A draft sweeps across the floor, chilling your ankles. Someone nearby coughs deeply, reminding you that sickness spreads faster than heat here. Still, the tent is better than sleeping under the open sky. You stretch out, pulling your cloak close, your armor stacked awkwardly near your head as a makeshift pillow. Imagine the sensations. The faint smoky scent from the fire outside clinging to your cloak, the damp smell of canvas pressing in, the prickly feel of straw beneath your cheek. You close your eyes, but sleep refuses to come easily. You shift, you shiver, you tug the cloak tighter, all while the cold slowly works its way in. You lie still as the cold works its way into the tent like water slipping through cracks. Somewhere outside, a guard calls out the hour. Another night in the medieval camp has begun. You shift slightly, blinking in the dim glow, and it becomes clear that the tent is both comfort and burden. Its walls rise only a few feet, leaning inward under the weight of collected snow. Your breath hangs in the stale air, drifting upward to the roof, where dark smoke stains show how often fires and lanterns have touched the fabric. When you run your hand across the canvas, it feels coarse, rough, and damp with condensation. There's no waterproof layer, no sealed seams. Just a simple barrier against the wind, weak yet strangely reassuring because it's the only protection available. A straightforward historical reality is that medieval army tents were necessities of logistics rather than luxury. Commanders transported them in long chains of carts, each pole and folded canvas weighing many pounds. Nobles used the larger pavilion-style tents, often dyed in bright colors or decorated to show their status. Ordinary foot soldiers relied on small, plain shelters, barely enough for 3 men squeezed together in darkness. The contrast was stark, yet even the smallest scrap of canvas felt like a fortress when winter's cold pressed in from all sides. One lesser-known detail is that soldiers sometimes rubbed animal fat or beeswax into the seams, hoping to block rain or snow. This left a faint greasy odor clinging to the fabric, mixing with smoke until the interior resembled a butcher's stall. It wasn't pleasant, but when a snowstorm hammered the camp and water rolled off instead of soaking blankets, the smell hardly mattered. Soldiers were practical. They would accept an unpleasant scent over the risk of frostbite without hesitation. Historians still debate how effective these makeshift shelters were over long periods. Some believe tents offered only a sense of safety, a roof that reassured soldiers even while illness spread. Others argue that the shared space, with many men packed tightly together, created enough body heat to make the temperature tolerable. Without tools like thermometers, and relying only on written accounts full of exaggeration, it's hard to know the truth. Did soldiers actually rest well, or were chroniclers simply smoothing over their hardships? The uncertainty lingers like the cold draft crawling around your feet. You pull your cloak closer and look at the minimal furnishings. There's a battered wooden chest serving as a stool. A pile of shields and spears leans in one corner, occupying the only dry spot where you wish you could stretch out. The canvas shivers like a drum each time the wind hits it, and droplets of melted frost fall onto your belongings. You curl up tighter, shoulders drawn inward, trying to picture warmth that isn't there. The sounds around you feel unusually close. One companion snores already, heavy and uneven. Another mutters softly, perhaps praying or complaining. Someone coughs sharply, the sound cutting through the cold air. Your stomach growls quietly in response. Outside, the muffled crack of burning wood reaches your ears, along with the faint scent of smoke that sinks into every thread of your cloak. The tent is full of sensations. Damp air, prickling skin, the low rhythm of breathing, the quiet shifting of bodies. You close your eyes briefly and consider how fragile the shelter is. A single spark from a torch could burn it to the ground. One strong gust could rip it from its stakes and send it tumbling across the camp. Yet as you breathe in the musty air and listen to the tired men around you, it becomes clear that this is survival, simple but essential. Despite its flaws, the tent is the only thing separating you from the vast, freezing darkness outside. You pull your cloak tighter, feeling the rough fabric scratch your chin. It's far from glamorous, but it's the only warmth you have. Wool becomes more than clothing here. It serves as your mattress, blanket, and protection all at once. It's heavy, rough, and slightly itchy, but it's also one of the few materials that keeps warmth even when it's damp. You lie back, pulling the edges over your shoulders like a cocoon, and it becomes clear that this single garment may determine whether you get any real rest or spend the night shaking until sunrise. One well-documented fact is that medieval soldiers depended heavily on their cloaks, not just for marching but also for sleeping. Historical records frequently mention soldiers lying down wrapped in their cloaks, especially on campaigns where carrying extra bedding was not practical. Even high-ranking officers, when forced into long expeditions, sometimes abandoned mattresses and sheets, relying instead on the layered folds of their cloaks to serve as makeshift bedding. It was a universal tool, clothing during the day, bedding at night. Here's an interesting detail. Some cloaks became so thick and oily from continuous use that they developed a natural water resistance, similar to modern wax jackets. Soldiers joked that their cloaks could practically stand upright in a corner by themselves. It wasn't only dirt causing this stiffness but months of sweat, grease, spilled ale, and even traces of cooked meat absorbed into the fibers. Unpleasant? Definitely. Effective against light rain or melting snow? Surprisingly, yes. Over time, the cloak turned into a kind of accidental weather-resistant layer, a second skin aging like a strange, smelly form of armor. Naturally, historians still debate how much warmth these cloaks truly offered in freezing conditions. Some claim the thickness of wool cloaks provided insulation comparable to a blanket. Others argue that without extra layers beneath, such as straw, hay, or furs, soldiers wrapped only in cloaks still lost significant body heat to the frozen ground. Was the cloak a reliable defense or simply a minimal barrier against harsh weather? Sources differ, and the reality was likely somewhere between the two viewpoints. You shift slightly, feeling the uneven, hardened earth beneath you. The cloak softens the cold a little, but the ground still presses against your bones. Instinctively, you curl tighter, pulling your knees toward your chest, because conserving heat works best when your body is compact. Around you, others do the same. Shapes wrapped in will blur into one another, becoming indistinct bundles with only an occasional cough or quiet whisper revealing they're still awake. The air is damp, and each exhale leaves a thin layer of moisture inside your cloak, making the fabric clammy. You press your face into the wool anyway, catching hints of lanolin and smoke. It's not comforting, but it's what you have for the night. Someone shifts nearby, their cloak brushing yours, and the brief contact feels almost reassuring. Everyone guards their own small pocket of warmth, yet together these pockets form a crowded cluster of survival. Picture it more clearly. Cloaks in muted browns, grays, and worn blues, edges frayed, hems stiff from dried mud. Each cloak carries signs of long marches, bad weather, and difficult battles. They are functional coverings but also quiet records of everything their owners have endured. And as you lie wrapped in your own worn piece of wool, you recognize that you're experiencing what countless soldiers before you have faced. Cloaks help them endure the cold long enough to continue fighting, and you hope yours will do the same tonight. You roll to your side, gripping the cloak tightly, and immediately bump into another soldier. Privacy doesn't exist here. The tent is cramped, and warmth requires everyone to stay close. You hear steady breathing, the soft rubbing of wool on wool, and feel the faint heat coming from the man only inches away. Without thinking, you shift slightly closer because warmth is something shared. It increases only when everyone contributes a little of their own. One clear historical fact is that medieval soldiers often slept in groups, pressed shoulder to shoulder and hip to hip, forming a shared pocket of heat. Chroniclers of the Crusades frequently mention, continues, men sometimes slept piled together like dogs, using their combined body heat to survive icy desert nights. In the frozen woodlands of northern Europe, whole groups squeezed into cramped tents, knowing no single soldier could withstand the cold alone. It wasn't sentimental. It was simply the most practical insulation available when firewood was limited and blankets were scarce. And here's a small, amusing detail. In some armies, soldiers gave each other nicknames based on how they slept. The loud snorer became the bellows, while the restless kicker earned the title the mule. These labels often stayed with them outside the tent as well. It was a small reminder of how troops tried to turn discomfort into humor whenever possible. After all, if you can't laugh about spending the night pressed against an unwashed comrade, what else is there to do? Historians still debate whether this close sleeping arrangement encouraged unity or fueled frustration. Some claim it strengthened bonds of trust after men endured such physical closeness. Others argue it bred irritation instead, spreading lice and bad moods just as quickly as warmth. Did this pull soldiers together or slowly wear them down? The records remain divided. Shift a bit in the dark and you notice how uneven the heat feels. The side touching your comrade warms fast, while your exposed back remains cold as stone. So you roll again, awkwardly bumping into someone else. Now you're wedged between two bodies, each offering a bit of heat that seeps into your bones. It's uncomfortable, certainly, but your shivering eventually weakens. The smell is strong: sweat, smoke, leather, unwashed feet. But you accept it, because inhaling it is better than feeling the sharp chill cut through your ribs. The sounds never really stop. Someone snores harshly, shaking the canvas with every breath. Another soldier coughs into his sleeve. A quiet prayer drifts through the dark. You even hear a faint laugh, dry, strained, almost nervous, as if one man has reached the point where the absurdity of this human heap feels too much to handle. You close your eyes and settle into the rhythm of shared survival. Picture the scene from above. A tangle of cloaks and limbs, similar to a cluster of animals bedding down for warmth. The tent walls bulge outward under the pressure of bodies inside. Outside, the wind claws at the ropes, but in here you're cushioned by living walls of flesh and fabric. You are not alone, not tonight. Whether you want it or not, necessity has turned you into part of a collective body, breathing, sweating, and shivering in rough coordination. You exhale and rest your forehead against the coarse wool of the cloak beside you. The heat doesn't erase the cold completely, but it softens the ache deep in your bones. As you drift into an uneasy sleep, you understand that this closeness, this shared warmth, was more than a tactic. It was a requirement, a simple fact of survival in a medieval camp. No one was meant to face the night alone. The fire is the camp's heartbeat. You hear it before you see it. The crackle, the soft pop, the faint hiss of damp wood. Step outside the tent and there it is. A circle of glowing embers, pulsing orange and red. A few tired logs lean against one another like old men supporting each other. The flames don't rise high tonight. They stay low, chewing through whatever scraps the soldiers manage to gather. Twigs, branches, even pieces of broken carts. Firewood is always limited. Every man here understands that keeping the fire alive through the night can mean both safety and risk. Historically, medieval armies relied on campfires not just for cooking but for basic survival in the winter. Fires were intentionally placed among small clusters of tents so their faint warmth could spread into the canvas walls. Archaeologists have even found recurring circles of scorched soil in old encampments, evidence of countless fires tended carefully during harsh campaigns. Without them, the cold would claim lives faster than any weapon. They often carried fire with them, literally. Soldiers would scoop glowing embers into clay pots or even metal helmets, covering them with ash so they could relight them at dawn without struggling with flint in freezing air. Picture holding a warm but smoldering pot in your arms, careful not to burn yourself yet knowing that ember is the only guarantee of heat the next day. These glowing containers were passed around like valuable supplies, a portable hearth on the move. Even so, historians still debate whether the benefit outweighed the danger. Fires inside or near tents could send sparks onto canvas, especially since most medieval tents were coated in oily residue from smoke and grime. Some researchers believe commanders banned open flames inside shelters entirely, forcing men to depend solely on shared body heat. Others argue that small braziers were actually common, placed and maintained carefully even inside thin tent walls. Was this a widespread method or just a risky habit practiced by a few? Written records conflict, leaving us with plenty of smoke but no conclusive answer. You sit by the fire now, your face warmed while your back stays cold. That is fire's constant limitation. It never heats everything evenly. You stretch out your hands until your palms sting, then rub them together. The glow turns every crease in your skin red. Your cloak smells even more of smoke, the wool absorbing ash that will cling for days. You angle your boots closer to dry the mud, careful not to damage the leather. Around you, men mumble softly, the kind of half-asleep talk that slips out when exhaustion blunts the mind. The fire crackles and sends sparks drifting upward into the dark sky. Each spark vanishes like a faint star. Smoke curls into your nose and brings tears to your eyes. Still, you lean closer because the heat means survival. Behind you, someone shifts in their cloak and groans. Another soldier pokes the embers, trying to coax more glow from the sinking logs. The fire needs constant care, like a living thing. If no one feeds it, it dies before morning. Imagine the routine this created in camp life. Soldiers rotated not only guard duty but also fire duty, stepping out of tents to toss on more branches. You can picture the crunch of footsteps in snow, the quick muttered curses when a hand accidentally brushes a hot ember. Sometimes a log collapses with a sharp crack, releasing a brief burst of light that highlights the tents, the horses, and the tired faces around the camp. For a moment the whole scene looks like a living painting. Shadows shifting, breath steaming, eyes catching the glow. The fire almost seems to speak through its crackles and sighs. It reminds you that warmth is temporary, that survival is delicate, and that everyone here depends on this thin ring of light. The fire even makes you sleepy. The steady rhythm, the heat on your skin, the soft flicker that blurs the edges of everything. But you know you can't stay there. Falling asleep beside the flames could mean waking up in smoke, or not waking at all. So you return to your tent, carrying with you just a trace of warmth. Your cloak holds the heat for a moment before it fades in the cold air. Inside, the men shift as you settle into your place. You curl up again, knees tucked in, cloak wrapped tightly, imagining the embers still glowing outside. That fragile source of heat is what keeps the entire camp alive. Without it, nothing remains but silence, snow, and the long cold night closing in. Now consider the delicate balance fire forced medieval soldiers to maintain. Too little fire meant freezing. Too much fire risked burning down tents. And then there was the danger of enemies spotting the glow from miles away. Commanders had to decide how much risk to accept. A fire could save lives from the cold, but it could also expose the camp's position to a vigilant scout. You can picture the commanders debating these choices, faces tense, voices low. Should the flames be kept burning, or allowed to die while their men shiver? Quiet nights in the dark often came down to necessity. During certain sieges, lighting fires was completely prohibited because avoiding detection mattered more than warmth. Soldiers sat together without light, chewing on cold rations and muttering quietly. In other situations where staying alive outweighed secrecy, entire camps burned with numerous fires, their smoke rising like signals into the sky. Whatever choice was made, fire influenced every part of a soldier's night and every moment of uneasy rest. As the wind pushes against the canvas walls tonight, you understand how much you depend on that crackling outside. The tent may be thin, the cloak uncomfortable, and the bodies around you unpleasant, but the fire is different. It feels almost alive, your only reply to the cold, the one thing suggesting you might endure the night. You close your eyes, holding onto the image of its glow as you drift into shallow sleep while the embers hiss softly, offering a fragile sense of protection. You wake later, unsure at first what disturbed you. Then you notice the rough texture against your cheek and the faint brush along your arm. Shifting slightly, you realize you're lying not only on soil but on something heavier and warmer. A pelt. Animal skins placed under the body served as a barrier between soldiers and the hard ground. Across medieval Europe, using hides, sheep, goat, deer was common for insulation. Wealthier fighters might have fox, wolf, or even beaver furs that softened the earth and held heat. Poorer soldiers made do with whatever hides they could acquire, sometimes untanned and still carrying the strong smell of animal fat. Archaeological digs at temporary camps have uncovered hardened leather scraps, remnants of these essential bedding materials. There's also an unusual detail. During severe campaigns, some soldiers slept on freshly removed hides, still warm from the animal's body. Picture lying on a partly warm, partly bloody skin, ignoring the odor because it might protect your feet from freezing. Chroniclers even joked that soldiers sometimes took warmth from the same animals they ate, as though food and bedding came from one source. It was grim, practical, and not something one would want to describe to anyone back home. Historians still debate how widespread this practice actually was. Some believe pelts were mainly for knights and officers, with common soldiers relying on straw or cloaks. Others cite records showing that sheepskins were occasionally distributed as standard supplies, implying that hides may have been common even among foot soldiers. Were they routine issue or simply available when livestock happened to be nearby? Sources remain unclear, like a fading fire in the night. You shift again, pressing your hand to the hide. The fur feels coarse, the hairs prickling your skin, but it does retain some warmth. The earth beneath it is still cold, though less sharply so. The pelt offers a small comfort, a reminder that you are not lying directly on frozen ground. Its smell is earthy and musky, with a faint smoky hint from an attempt to dry it too fast. It isn't pleasant, but it keeps you grounded. Around you, men move in their sleep, cloaks rustling, bodies adjusting. One draws his pelt closer, curling around it like an animal seeking warmth. Another has none at all, and you hear his teeth rattling in the dark. You almost feel sorry for him, but sympathy is not something soldiers can afford. You clutch your piece of hide tightly, treating it like something valuable. Think of the textures. The greasy surface of partly tanned leather, the brush of fur against your face as you turn, the moisture that creeps in when melted snow leaks under the tent. You can almost sense the pelts becoming stiff over time, coated with dirt, sweat, and days of use. Comfort is always relative, but survival is non-negotiable. Outside the camp, the wind murmurs through the darkness. The fire has burned low, leaving only fading embers. The canvas above shifts with every gust. You close your eyes again, cheek pressed against the pelt, wondering whether tomorrow you'll still wake with its scent clinging to you, or whether you'll wake at all. For now, this small remnant of an animal's life is the only thing keeping you from freezing. And that is enough. When you stir awake, the first thing you notice is your feet. They feel swollen, the toes numb and tingling with a dull ache that never quite leaves. You didn't take your boots off. Not last night and not the night before. You know the reason. If you remove them, you might not be able to put them back on. The leather freezes until it's as stiff as wood. The laces turn brittle with ice, and your swollen toes refuse to fit inside. So you sleep in them, the same boots you march in. One clear fact: medieval soldiers often kept their boots laced while sleeping. Chroniclers mention men too wary of frostbite or night attacks to expose bare feet. Even rough leather boots with hobnails offered more than protection from terrain. They served as insulation. Removing them in severe cold could mean waking to frozen footwear or damaged feet. Enduring the smell and discomfort was far safer than losing toes to winter. There's also an unusual detail. Soldiers sometimes packed straw, moss, or strips of wool into their boots as makeshift insulation, layering them like early versions of socks. The result was bulky, awkward boots that squeaked and often smelled of damp decay, but the added warmth helped prevent frostbite. Some men even believed smearing animal fat inside created a seal against the cold. Imagine sliding your feet into that greasy mixture and still calling it warmth. It sounds odd now, but in harsh conditions, practicality mattered more than dignity. Historians continue to debate how sustainable this habit truly was. Some argue constant boot-wearing caused conditions similar to trench foot long before trenches existed. Feet swollen, blistered, and raw from lack of air. Others think soldiers rotated boots, drying one pair near the fire while wearing another, though this assumes they owned more than one, something poorer soldiers likely didn't. Was constant boot-wearing common for everyone, or mainly a hardship for lower ranks? Evidence remains uncertain. You wiggle your toes, trying to restore feeling, but the hardened leather barely gives. Your socks, or rather the damp wool scraps serving as socks, are clammy, stiff with sweat. The smell rises, sharp and sour, mixing with smoke and unwashed bodies. Everyone smells the same, so no one bothers to complain. You press your boots closer to the fading fire, hoping the leather softens. The heat warms your soles for a moment before fading. Others do the same, boots clustered around the embers like offerings to an unseen god. One man mutters that his heel has turned black. Another swears about a blister. A third jokes he'd trade his boots for a hot bath if such a miracle existed. You laugh lightly too, because there's little else to do. The boots may feel like cages, but they are also lifelines. Without them, you'd lose more than comfort. You'd lose the ability to march, to fight, to endure. Picture the sounds around you. The crackle of stiff leather, the snap of frayed laces, and the groans of men pulling boots off only to push them back on moments later. You can almost hear the squish of damp wool and the hiss when a soul gets too close to the fire. The entire tent smells of wet leather, a sharp scent that sinks into cloaks and hair. It's unpleasant, but in this frozen camp, unpleasantness is better than the silent threat of frostbite. You settle down again, boots still tightly laced, toes pressed together like unwilling neighbors. The leather digs into your ankles, rubbing against already sore skin. You accept the sting against your skin because the choice is clear. A little comfort now or the chance to make it through another day. You let your eyes close, boots still tightly on your feet, and understand why medieval soldiers rarely removed them. Their survival stayed with them, step after step, night after night, until morning returned. Your breath clouds the cramped, stale air as you reach for the flask beside you. The liquid inside moves quietly, carrying its own promise. You take a sip, and the warmth moves down your throat, briefly pushing away the shivers. Whether it's mild ale, mead, or something harsher brewed nearby, it makes no difference. In this cold, soldiers called it medicine, and for a few moments you agree. A historical fact: alcohol was a standard supply in medieval camps, used not only for comfort but out of necessity. Diluted wine, weak ale, or any fermented drink available was often safer than contaminated water. On freezing nights, soldiers treated it like a basic antifreeze, dulling their senses just enough to fall asleep. Chroniclers wrote of men strengthening their hearts with drink, a polite way of saying they took quick gulps of liquid warmth before giving in to the darkness. Here's a strange detail. Some soldiers believed strong drink could stop frostbite by warming the blood. They would rub spirits on their skin or soak their socks in ale before wearing them, convinced it created a protective barrier. Of course, it did nothing of the sort, but the belief itself offered comfort. Imagine the sight: walking into your tent with beer-soaked socks, smelling like a tavern, yet confidently claiming you'd feel warmer because of it. Historians still debate alcohol's actual role. Some suggest it genuinely improved morale, helping soldiers stay hopeful during long campaigns. Others point out that drunkenness weakened camps, making men slower to react to surprise attacks or emergencies. So was alcohol a practical aid or a dangerous crutch disguised as warmth? The discussion continues without a clear answer. You lower the flask, lips tingling, and breathe out slowly. The heat settles unevenly. Your chest feels warm, but your hands are still stiff, and your toes remain frozen inside your boots. Around you, other men drink as well. The quiet sound of flasks opening and closing breaks the silence. Someone mumbles a half-forgotten tune. Another laughs under his breath, wiping his mouth on a dirty sleeve. A third leans back against the canvas, as if the drink alone has softened its roughness. The tent fills with the scent of ale, sour, yeasty, slightly sweet. It blends with smoke and sweat, clinging to coats and hair. You can almost taste it in the air as much as in the flask. It won't eliminate the cold, but it convinces the body that warmth is possible. And sometimes that small illusion is enough for a soldier to fall into a restless sleep. But it carries risks. Too much drink and your awareness fades. You might not notice the fire outside dying down, a guard drifting off, or an enemy creeping close. Several campaigns recorded tents burning because someone passed out holding a flask, letting embers fall where they shouldn't. The line between comfort and danger is thin, blurred a little more with every swallow. You lean back as the drink settles into your bloodstream. Your eyelids feel heavier, and the cold seems less sharp, as if its edges have been rounded off. You know the warmth is deceptive, your body is still losing heat, but you accept the comfort anyway. You pull your cloak around you, tuck the flask near your chest, and close your eyes. For now, the ale has done what you needed. It has given you just enough warmth to fall asleep. The itch wakes you before the cold does. At first it's a small tickle at your neck, something you scratch without thinking, but it quickly spreads. A crawl at your scalp, a pinch behind your knee, the clear bite at your waist where clothing meets skin. You sigh quietly and drag your nails across your tunic, already knowing what has joined you in the tent. Lice. One simple historical truth is that medieval soldiers lived with lice as constantly as they did with their cloaks and swords. Chroniclers of the Crusades, the 30 Years' War, and even smaller campaigns often describe armies so infested that men joked about their tiny companions being as loyal as their comrades in arms. Clothing was rarely cleaned, water was limited, and the warmth of crowded tents created ideal conditions for lice to thrive. Here's a detail both amusing and unsettling. Some soldiers gave their lice names. Imagine sitting by the fire, scratching at your shirt, and declaring that the little parasite you just picked off is Henry the Bold or Margaret the Persistent. It was gallows humor, a way to cope with the constant biting and crawling that never truly stopped. Some men even organized races, dropping lice onto warm surfaces to see which one moved fastest. Boredom and misery inspired strange pastimes. Historians still debate the actual impact of lice on medieval armies. Some argue infestations were mostly an unpleasant nuisance. Others highlight the role of lice in spreading deadly diseases like typhus, which could decimate camps faster than enemy attacks. Were lice simply irritating companions, or silent killers hidden in wool and seams. The evidence leaves us scratching for answers. You shift on your cloak, fingers digging beneath your collar. The fabric is coarse with grit and sweat, and you feel tiny bumps where lice cling to seams. You pinch one, roll it between your fingertips until it pops faintly, then wipe your hand on the ground. Around you, men scratch, mutter, and curse under their breath. The sound is constant, like rustling mice in dry straw. The tent smells sour with sweat and smoke, mixed with the faint iron tang of blood from scratching. There's no cure tonight. Bathing is impossible. Clean clothing doesn't exist. All you can do is endure the crawling sensation that makes your skin twitch as you try to sleep. Picture the scene closely. One man wriggles on the ground, cloak shifting as he mutters, fighting an invisible foe. Another lifts his shirt to the firelight, squinting at pale specks clinging like seeds. A third shakes his woolen hood, sending a small shower of lice scattering like grains of sand. It's disgusting, yes, but it's also normal. So normal that no one even glances up from scratching. You sigh, resigned, and tuck deeper into your cloak, though it only traps the pests closer. The itch won't let you rest, but exhaustion eventually prevails. Your eyes close, and the crawling fades into the background hum of camp life. The creak of canvas, a neighbor's cough, the hiss of wind outside. In the world of medieval soldiers, even parasites were part of survival. Gradually, you notice other sounds. Low voices, muffled footsteps, the shift of armor in the dark. The tent is not alone in motion. The entire camp never truly sleeps. Someone is always awake, tending the fire, scanning the horizon, alert for the flicker of an enemy torch or the shadow of a raider. This is the rhythm of guard duty, a rotation of men standing watch while others sleep. One historical fact is clear. Medieval armies divided the night into watches. The number varied, sometimes 3, sometimes 4, depending on the commander. Chroniclers of the 100 Years' War mention the first and last watches, the latter dreaded because it forced men from shallow sleep into the cold, dark hours before dawn. Without these rotations, camps risked complete surprise. Fires smothered, soldiers slaughtered in their beds. A quirky detail: guards often carried not only weapons but wooden clappers or horns, designed to scare off intruders or alert the camp to danger. Imagine struggling to stay awake, trudging through a frozen camp, stamping your boots to keep blood moving, occasionally clapping sticks together like a one-man percussion band just to prevent your eyelids from closing. Some guards hum quietly under their breath, repeating lines like lullabies turned into wakefulness. Historians, however, still debate how strict these watches truly were. Some accounts describe rigid discipline, with severe punishment for sleeping on duty. Others suggest rotations were inconsistent, particularly in smaller campaigns, with guards dozing off and relying on dogs or sheer luck to alert them. Was guard duty a hardened survival system or a fragile hope that someone would stay awake at the right moment? The truth likely lies somewhere in between. Now you picture yourself stirred from half-sleep, cloak pulled tight around your shoulders, stumbling out of the tent. The outside air hits sharply, icy against your face. Your breath bursts into the night like smoke. The fire has burned low, embers glowing faintly, casting flickering shadows over the clustered tents. You take your spear, metal cold, wood colder, and begin the slow patrol around the camp perimeter. The ground crunches beneath your boots. Every few steps you pause, listening, straining to hear beyond the wind's groan and the occasional snore drifting from tents. Somewhere, a horse stamps and nickers, shaking its mane against the cold. Your toes ache, your knees stiffen, but you keep moving because stillness could be deadly. You glance at the fire periodically, checking that it hasn't sunk too low. If it has, more wood must be added, though supplies dwindle faster than anyone admits. The night in camp has its own rhythm. Canvas flaps rustle. Men cough in unison like an odd choir. The fire pops, sending sparks upward. Beyond that is silence, deep, endless, the kind of silence that reminds you how small and fragile you are beneath this vast sky. You peer into the darkness, expecting glowing eyes, though usually there is nothing. Still, the mind plays tricks, and every shadow can seem threatening. As you circle back toward the tents, you hear voices. Two men whispering in their sleep, dreaming aloud. One mutters a woman's name. Another curses as if fighting invisible foes. You glance inside to see bodies shifting under cloaks. A pile of exhausted men who rely on you to keep the night safe. The responsibility feels heavy. You stamp your boots again, reminding yourself that staying awake is your only duty. Some nights the rotation drags like a heavy chain. You count stars, recite prayers, mutter verses, clinging to anything that keeps you alert. Other nights, the cold alone is enough to keep your eyes open, biting at your lids whenever they droop. You think of the generations of soldiers before you who endured the same, shuffled in darkness, cursed the frost, begged for dawn. This rhythm is ancient, stretching beyond memory. Eventually, another soldier relieves you. His cloak is tight, eyes blurred, and he nods without a word. You hand over the spear, mutter something about the fire, and slip back into your tent. The warmth feels relative, like stepping into a steaming bath compared to the frozen air outside. You curl into your spot, limbs stiff but grateful, cloak wrapped around your shoulders once more. Drifting back into sleep, you realize that guard duty isn't just about watching for enemies. It's about maintaining the fire, the camp's rhythm, and keeping fear from overwhelming everyone. Without it, the night would collapse into chaos. With it, the camp breathes, even as most men dream deeply. You don't recall exactly when sleep returns, but the voices linger, weaving through your half-dreams, soft like lullabies yet rough with exhaustion. A man nearby hums a fragment of a song, and the night continues its quiet rhythm. Only the faint vibrations of lost words buzzed softly through the canvas walls. Another man muttered a prayer, repeating the same line until it merged with the rhythm of your breathing. There is a quiet comfort in knowing you are never truly alone in this tent, even when your eyes close. Historically, medieval soldiers often sang together at night, both to pass the time and to lift morale. Chronicles from campaigns in France and the Holy Land describe men gathering around fires, chanting psalms or bawdy ballads, depending on their audience. These songs served a purpose beyond entertainment. They acted as shields against despair, reminders that voices could rise above the cold and the hardship. Here's an unusual detail. Soldiers sometimes drifted to sleep by quietly reciting food recipes, a kind of culinary lullaby. Imagine lying on frozen ground, teeth chattering, while a tentmate whispers about roasting geese, thick stews, or dripping pies. The absurdity kept men laughing long enough to forget, for a moment, the misery gnawing at their bones. Some even believed that naming dishes helped ease hunger, as if words alone could fill empty stomachs. Scholars still debate the purpose of this nightly chatter. Some argue it was a deliberate attempt to build camaraderie, forging bonds through shared stories and songs. Others suggest it was nervous noise, a way to mask the silence that reminded men how close death might be. Was it fellowship or fear? Records suggest it was both, leaving an echo that is difficult to define. You shift under your cloak, listening as the sounds rise and fall. A snore joins the chorus, deep and guttural, while another voice murmurs a love song so faint it's unclear if it is for the group or for memory alone. Outside, the fire crackles and the wind lashes against the canvas. Inside, the voices provide another kind of warmth. Not physical, but psychological, fragile yet enough to keep despair at bay. The tent hums with murmurs. Someone groans. Another laughs softly. Someone curses under their breath. The words blur, mixing with the shuffle of limbs and scratching of cloth. To a stranger, it might sound chaotic, but to you, it is comforting. Every sound is proof of life, that men still breathe and dream despite the cold. You close your eyes tighter, letting the murmur carry you. A half-remembered hymn drifts above a quiet joke in the corner. Sacred and profane intertwine seamlessly, sharing space without conflict. You realize that countless soldiers before you heard the same soundscape. Snores, songs, prayers, and curses mingled in smoky air. Picture it clearly. Men huddled under cloaks, faces shadowed, lips moving in half-conscious rhythm. One traces the sign of the cross, another recounts a bawdy tale, another hums through cracked lips. No one directs this chorus, it happens spontaneously, like the fire outside. Voices flicker, glow, and eventually fade into embers. As sleep finally returns, you understand how medieval soldiers made space for themselves during unbearable nights. They could not drive away the cold, but they could fill the silence. These voices created a net strong enough to hold back despair until morning. You awaken in the middle of the night with a quiet clarity. Your sleep has been divided. First, you fell into heavy slumber shortly after your watch, lulled by the fire's fading glow and the surrounding murmurs. Now, hours later, you find yourself awake, staring at the dim canvas ceiling, listening to men stirring, coughing, and shifting in the darkness. It feels unusual, as though sleep itself has been split in two. Historically, this experience reflects. In the medieval world, segmented sleep was common. Scholars studying pre-industrial life refer to it as first sleep and second sleep. People would sleep for a few hours, wake naturally around midnight, and spend an hour or two talking, praying, tending fires, or visiting neighbors before returning to rest. Soldiers in tents followed a similar pattern, though for them it was shaped more by necessity than choice. Cold, noise, and constant watch duties divided their nights into segments. Here's an interesting detail. Some men believed this midnight waking was an ideal time for storytelling, often sharing tales of ghosts and omens. Picture lying in a smoky tent, eyes half open, as a neighbor whispers of spirits roaming battlefields, dead men knocking on tent walls, or saints appearing in dreams to offer protection. What seems like campfire folklore could feel almost real in the dim light. Some soldiers even claimed to see glowing figures near the fire, though whether they were spirits or smoke illusions remains unknown. Historians still debate whether segmented sleep was truly restful. Some argue it was natural, the body tuned to cycles of firelight and darkness. Others suggest it left soldiers perpetually tired, unable to recover before dawn's return to marching. Was broken sleep adaptive, or another burden on exhausted bodies? The question remains unresolved, though men clearly endured it. You shift in your cloak, tightening it against the cold, listening to the surrounding sounds. A soft voice rises in prayer, words tumbling in Latin. Another soldier groans, recounting a dream to a half-awake comrade. Nearby, someone sighs heavily, whispering about fresh bread and roasted meat, longing for anything beyond the stale crusts waiting at morning. You almost taste the imagined feast, while your stomach protests. Outside, the fire has burned to embers, though its glow filters through the tent seams. A guard passes, boots crunching in snow, spear tapping rhythmically. Farther off, a horse whinnies softly, shaking frost from its mane. The world feels suspended, caught between deep night and a dawn still distant. This is a liminal moment, a pause in the relentless routine of soldiering, where men are neither fully awake nor fully asleep. You pull your cloak over your head, blocking the draft, drifting into half-conscious thought. Perhaps this is the time when secrets emerge. Men whisper about families left behind, fears never spoken in daylight. Perhaps curses are uttered more freely, aimed at commanders, enemies, or even God for allowing such hardship. In this half-dreaming state, words flow freely, unguarded. Imagine the tent as a hive of quiet activity. Some men slip outside into the snow, others poke at the fire, while others whisper stories blending fact and legend. The canvas walls glow faintly with coal's light, shadows bending and stretching as men move. It is both eerie and intimate, a mix of exhaustion and heightened alertness. Eventually, the rhythm shifts again. Voices fade, movements slow. Men roll back into their cloaks, hoods pulled over heads, and gradually snores return one by one, until the tent hums once more with the sound of second sleep. Your eyelids grow heavy, body sinking toward the earth. Cold bites, yet drowsiness prevails. As you surrender again to sleep, you realize that medieval soldiers didn't just face enemies on the battlefield. They battled the night itself. The broken rhythm, constant interruptions, an uneasy balance between wakefulness and rest. And yet, like you now, They found a way to close their eyes and trust that second sleep would carry them through the dawn. You wake, not to the itch of lice or the howl of wind, but to the steady rhythm of men breathing closely around you. In the dim light, one fact is impossible to ignore. Not all cloaks and bedding are made equal. The man across from you, a knight's retainer, shifts in his sleep, wrapped in thick wool layered with fur, while you lie on rough canvas and a hide that still smells faintly of goat. Rank does not vanish in the dark. It curls up beside you and snores in comfort, while you shiver. Historically, the quality of sleeping gear varied drastically between knights and common foot soldiers. Wealthier men could afford lined cloaks, feather-stuffed pallets, or fine blankets carried by servants. Chronicles describe nobles sleeping beneath embroidered pavilions, complete with rugs and pillows. In contrast, ordinary soldiers had little more than their own cloaks, some straw, and perhaps a single blanket shared among 2 or 3. Comfort was another privilege of class. Here's an interesting detail. During some campaigns, knights insisted on bringing brightly colored bedding into the field, red, blue, or even patterned with their family crests. It wasn't just for comfort, it was a display. Imagine staggering half-frozen from the cold, only to see a nobleman's tent glowing with silks, like a festival pavilion in a sea of misery. It was both infuriating and absurd, like dragging a feather bed into the middle of a battlefield. Yet historians debate how wide this gap truly was. Some argue that knights' tents were genuine sanctuaries, warmed with rugs and layered bedding, while foot soldiers barely survived the night. Others suggest the difference was less extreme, as supply shortages sometimes forced even nobles to improvise roughly. Were knights consistently shielded from hardship, or did campaigns eventually wear down everyone equally? The answer remains unclear, shaped largely by the perspectives of the nobles who recorded the history. You glance again at your tentmate's furs, feeling a mix of envy and resignation. The fur glints faintly in the firelight leaking through the flap, while your own cloak smells of smoke and damp. Your neighbor snores softly, wrapped in comfort that might as well be another world away. Around you, other men shift restlessly, tugging their thinner cloaks tighter. Some mutter in sleep, teeth chattering even while unconscious. The scents in the tent reveal the divide. 2. The night's bedding carries a faint aroma of herbs or oils, probably applied by servants to mask the musk of fur. Yours reeks of sweat, grease, and stale ale. The inequality isn't just felt in warmth, it touches every sense. Picture the camp at dawn. Noble pavilions stand tall and richly colored, while straw-stuffed lean-tos sag nearby. The contrast is stark, almost grotesque. A visitor might think the field is a village where a carnival tent has sprouted beside a hovel. Yet in reality, both exist side by side because war pressed all classes into the same mud, though never on the same terms. You roll over, pulling your cloak tighter, reminding yourself that survival is not measured by softness. Comfort does not always guarantee endurance. Often, the man with fewer blankets learns faster how to huddle, how to endure, how to cling to scraps of warmth. You breathe in the smoky, sour air, letting the uneven breathing around you wash over you as you drift back toward a thin, stubborn sleep. The night may dream in fur, but you dream in endurance, and tonight, endurance is all that matters. Outside, the fire has sunk low again, and when you wake, you notice something else. A strange pot by the tent's entrance. A clay vessel blackened from repeated use, faintly warm. Someone has carried coals inside, banking them in a small brazier to keep the chill at bay. One reliable historical fact is that soldiers sometimes used improvised stoves, clay pots or metal braziers filled with coals, to heat their tents. Archaeological digs across Europe and the Near Archaeologists in the East have uncovered scorched pots and fragments of metal in camp layers, evidence of makeshift heaters. Chroniclers also mention them, describing vessels of fire carried into shelters to smolder beside exhausted men. They were dangerous, but offered something no cloak or hide could: steady warmth through the night. Here's an interesting detail. Soldiers sometimes dropped herbs or pine needles into the embers, not just for their faint aroma, but to repel biting insects. Imagine lying half-frozen, inhaling the scent of smoldering rosemary while still scratching at lice. The smell mixed oddly with smoke and sweat, creating an atmosphere somewhere between a battlefield and a kitchen. Some even believed certain herbs could ward off evil spirits, so a glowing pot served a double purpose: heater and supernatural shield. Historians still debate whether these braziers were common or rare luxuries. Some argue only officers could afford them, while ordinary soldiers relied solely on body heat. Others point to evidence that even modest camps had countless pots, suggesting widespread improvisation. Were these stoves a mark of rank or the clever work of desperate men with clay and fire? The debate burns as unevenly as the embers themselves. You move closer to the pot, stretching your hands toward its gentle warmth. The heat isn't strong, but in the drafty tent, it feels miraculous. You can almost imagine sleeping with some comfort instead of clenched teeth. Your palms tingle, your face softens, and for a brief moment, the cold seems to retreat. Around you, others stir. One mutters that the smoke stings his throat. Another coughs, but no one moves it away. Risk of choking or not, no one wants to surrender that precious heat. The pot hums softly as the coals settle, sending thin wisps of smoke up the canvas roof. The air grows thicker, hazier. You cough lightly, pull your cloak tighter to shield your nose, but still lean closer, drawn to the warmth. Even here, comfort carries a price. Picture the tent. Cloaks draped over shoulders, men crouched around a tiny brazier like monks around a relic. The coals glow red, faces lit from below, shadows twisting across rough canvas. Feels both sacred and dangerous. Life in embers, death in smoke. You wonder if you'll wake with a headache, a raw throat from the fumes. Yet surviving another night outweighs every risk. Lying back, cloak wrapped tight, warmth spreads unevenly but genuinely. Not enough to banish the cold, but enough to dull its bite. The pot of coals sits steady by the entrance, guardian and threat. As your eyelids droop, you realize this was the paradox of medieval survival. Every comfort, every fire, every drink, furs, even coals carried a shadow. Safety was never free. Morning comes. You wake stiff in every joint. This time, you notice the weight pressing down isn't just cold. It's the layers of clothing you never removed. Your quilted gambeson, the padded armor beneath steel, lies wadded beside you like a discarded mattress. Soldiers frequently used armor padding as bedding. A gambeson was more than battlefield protection. A thick quilted garment stuffed with linen or wool, sometimes weighing as much as 20 pounds. Stripped off at night, it doubled as mattress or blanket. Chronicles even describe knights propping helmets under their heads like lumpy pillows, turning tools of war into fragile comforts. Here's another detail. Soldiers joked that the gambeson was warmer dead than alive. On a march, it trapped sweat and heat until it felt like a furnace. But laid flat on the ground, it became a surprisingly effective cushion against the frozen earth. It became almost like luxurious padding. Some men claimed they slept better with their gambeson beneath their backs than on feather mattresses at home, though whether that was truth or simply desperation is unclear. Historians still debate its practicality. Some argue gambesons offered real insulation, thick enough to shield men from frost and damp. Others counter that once soaked with sweat and stiffened, they served little more than a barrier against mud. Was the gambeson a lifesaver at night, or merely another damp rag dragged from battlefield to camp? The sources leave us with a riddle stitched in linen. You lie back, feeling the uneven quilting beneath your spine. Some spots bulge, others sag, but compared to bare ground, it is paradise. The damp chill still seeps upward, but at least your bones no longer grind against frozen earth. You pull your cloak tighter around your shoulders, inhaling the faint stench of sweat clinging to the fabric. It smells sour, musky, unmistakably human. This gambeson has absorbed days of labor, battle, and fear. It carries the essence of endurance. Around you, others adjust similarly. A man lies with his gambeson draped over him like a blanket. Another sprawls on his breastplate as if it were a bedboard. A young soldier curls with his helmet pressed to his chest, as if holding a hard, cold child. The faint scrape of metal echoes whenever someone shifts, armor clinking like a small orchestra of rust. The tent fills with the mixed scent of wool, sweat, and iron. It isn't pleasant, but it's familiar. Soon, your nose adjusts, and the smell fades into a background you find almost comforting. You close your eyes, imagining the quilted layers beneath you as feathers rather than rags. The fabric scratches through your tunic, but you tell yourself it is soft. It's the only way to rest. Picture the scene clearly. Gambesons spread like patchwork mattresses, seams torn from battle, stuffing poking out like tufts of hair. Cloaks form uneven piles atop them. Helmets glint faintly in dim light, some pressed into service as pillows, others stacked neatly in corners. The tent looks like a jumble of war gear transformed into makeshift furniture. As your body sinks into this odd mattress, the irony hits. Everything designed to harm, swords, armor, helmets, becomes a tool for survival at night. War makes even padding sacred, the only barrier between you and the earth's frozen bite. You close your eyes, hands folded on your chest, drifting into shallow, uneasy sleep, grateful for softness that isn't truly soft. You wake suddenly, wrinkling your nose before opening your eyes. This time, it's not cold that disturbs you, it's the smell. A tent full of men is never fragrant. After nights of smoke, sweat, and damp wool, the odor almost becomes alive. You inhale cautiously. Sharp smoke from half-burned wood, sour sweat absorbed into cloaks, the wet dog scent of damp wool, and underneath, the faint tang of scorched stew. One firm historical fact: medieval camps reeked. Chroniclers often mention the stench before describing knightly bravery or the misery of marches. Fires burned constantly, soaking canvas and clothing in acrid smoke. Tents trapped moisture, turning wool and linen into mildewed sponges. Soldiers rarely bathed on campaign, which explains why the smell of camp required no further description. A small, curious detail: some commanders ordered herbs scattered on tent floors to mask odors. Soldiers crushed lavender, rosemary, or thyme beneath their boots, attempting to freshen the air. Imagine lying on straw laced with thyme, its brief sharpness soon overwhelmed by stronger scents of sweat. In some regions, men carried small pouches of dried herbs around their necks, not for elegance, but as a desperate attempt to breathe something cleaner. Smoke hangs thickly in the air, yet historians still debate how much the smell truly affected soldiers. Some claim it became so constant that men stopped noticing it, their senses dulled by weeks of foulness. Others argue it had serious consequences, spreading disease by attracting flies and fouling the air. Was it merely unpleasant, or another invisible enemy slowly wearing them down? Evidence gives no certainty, only scattered accounts of soldiers gagging over their own cloaks. You shift uneasily, tugging the fabric closer to your face, and the stench grows stronger. Wool damp with sweat and smoke, coarse against your cheek. You cough softly, your throat raw from breathing stale air all night. Around you, others groan awake, voices hoarse and heavy. One sneezes sharply, shaking the tent flap. Another mutters a curse at the reek, though he knows nothing will change it. The odors mingle in layers of misery. Smoke coats your tongue, bitter and metallic. Sweat clings sour and oily to your nostrils. Wet wool carries almost an animal scent, a reminder that your cloak once walked on four legs. Nearby, leather boots give off their own stench, scorched by fire, rotting from damp. Above it all lingers the faint char of last night's stew, beans fused stubbornly to the pot. You roll over, trying to bury your nose in the cleaner folds of your cloak, but there is no escape. The air is heavy, pressing on your senses. Even your dreams smell of smoke. You think of home. Fresh rushes on floors, sheets washed in river water. That memory stings sharper than the stench itself. Picture the tent. Cloak stiff with grime hanging from pegs, helmets dusted in soot, gambison steaming faintly from the fire's heat, releasing the odor of soaked wool. Men shift, scratch, cough, exhaling sour breath that mixes with everything else. The canvas walls themselves have absorbed months of smoke, giving off a bitter aroma whenever warmed. Yet, strangely, the smell becomes part of the rhythm of survival. It reminds you that you are alive, that the men around you are still breathing, still sweating, still sharing this miserable shelter. The reek is unpleasant, yes, but silence and clean air would mean something worse. An empty tent. You inhale again, coughing, letting the foulness settle in your chest like another layer of armor. As you close your eyes, it becomes clear that the medieval camp was as much about enduring sensations as it was about facing enemies. Cold, smoke, damp, itch and smell. All constant companions, all measures of survival. Tonight, persistence is the only fragrance you wear. Half asleep, you hear it first. A soft tapping, fingers drumming on canvas. Then the unmistakable chill seeps through seams. Rain, or worse, snow, finds every gap, dripping onto faces already weary from the cold. The tent, once a fragile refuge, now becomes its own enemy. You roll over, feeling icy drops splash against your cheek, jolting you upright. From surviving accounts, medieval tents were notoriously leaky. Heavy canvas and linen offered shade and some shelter, but once soaked, the fibers sagged and wept. Chronicles describe soldiers waking in puddles, cloaks drenched, straw bedding ruined overnight. In one campaign in Flanders, entire groups abandoned their shelters after storms, preferring the open air near a fire to the misery of dripping walls. Some soldiers tried to waterproof tents with animal fat or tar. The results were imperfect. Water still seeped in, and the canvas became greasy to the touch, faintly smelling of rancid lard. Imagine ducking inside only to be met with slick, sticky fabric that stained your hands and clothing. It might have kept a little rain out, but it also meant sleeping in a shelter that... The tent smelled sharply of damp wool and leather, almost like a butcher's shop. Historians debate how soldiers truly coped with long, relentless rains. Some suggest they rotated duties, constantly replacing soaked straw with fresh bedding. Others argue there was no escape. Men simply endured it. Soldiers slept wet, woke shivering, and marched in sodden gear. Whether there was an effective method to stay dry or if survival relied solely on stubbornness remains unclear. You curl tighter under your cloak, but the wet seeps in anyway. Wool provides some warmth even when damp, though it clings uncomfortably to the skin. Beneath you, the ground has turned to mud, rising like the earth itself is swallowing you. Around you, men mutter complaints, adjust their bedding, and shove cloaks against leaks. One soldier groans as water drips steadily onto his forehead, refusing to shift no matter what he does. The tense smell intensifies. Wet wool gives off a sour, barnyard scent, and soaked leather grows sharp and pungent. Smoke from the fire outside mixes with the damp, filling the air with a heavy odor that makes breathing labored. You cough. The man beside you coughs too, each breath forming pale mist in the dark. Picture the scene. Canvas walls sagging with rivulets of water, straw mats sinking into sludge, cloaks wrapped tightly around shivering bodies. Outside, the fire hisses as rain spatters the embers, sending steam into the cold air. The night pulses not with voices but with the steady drip, 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 a rhythm of discomfort seeping into every dream. Yet, there is a strange unity in this misery. Soldiers who had been grumbling moments ago now share grim laughter. One jokes he'll grow gills, another swears the dripping water is holy, a baptism for unspoken sins. The laughter is weak but genuine, and in that moment humor becomes a fragile warmth, a blanket against the damp. You pull your cloak tighter and close your eyes, knowing the storm will not end simply because you wish it. Drops will fall, boots will stay wet, bedding will stink, and armor in the morning will be heavier than ever. Yet somehow you know you will rise anyway, stiff and miserable, ready to march through mud. Leaking tents and sucking ground matter less than the routine that carries you forward. This endurance, more than dryness or warmth, is the true shield against freezing, the refusal to stop. When the storm fades, the night never feels entirely safe. You lie listening to the rain diminish, replaced by a faint clinking, charms brushing against one another. Lifting your head, You notice small pouches, wooden crosses, and bones dangling from the tent poles. These are not decorations, but protective talismans. Contemporary sources show that superstitions permeated medieval soldier life, even sleep. Men pinned amulets inside cloaks, hung charms on ropes, and carved symbols into poles, seeking protection while vulnerable. Some carried saint medals, others fragments of relics, blurring the line between faith and survival. Eastern European soldiers had stranger practices. Small animal skulls tied to tents to ward off frost demons or spirits, sprinkling holy water, or whatever passed for it, around tent edges. You can imagine a weary man fumbling for his flask, sprinkling drops on muddy ground, muttering half-remembered prayers. These rituals offered comfort more than certainty. Scholars continue to debate whether these were sincere religious acts or folk superstition, but both served the same purpose: a sense of security in the dark, cold night. Of the same faith that sent men on crusades or pilgrimages, or perhaps driven more by instinct than doctrine, soldiers relied on small rituals. Were these gestures meant to protect their souls, or were they simply distractions from the relentless wind? Historical records offer fragments but no definitive answer. You reach for the nearest charm, a small cloth knot, stiff with grease and faintly smoky. Perhaps it once held herbs, perhaps it was a token from a loved one. Now, reduced to a talisman in this wet camp. Its owner believes it matters, and as you lie beneath it, you realize it matters to you as well, if only as a reminder of life beyond war. Around you, men murmur half-sleep prayers mingled with curses. One crosses himself repeatedly, whispering the names of saints. Another rubs a wooden token with practiced habit. Elsewhere, someone snores, oblivious, either too tired or too skeptical to join in. The tent becomes a peculiar chapel, its congregation sprawled on damp ground, hymns mumbled, relics improvised. The air carries not just the smell of wet wool, but a faint hint of crushed herbs, lavender or thyme, perhaps. You breathe it in, and for a moment, the tent almost smells like home. Then a gust blows through, shattering the illusion. Still, you cling to it. The canvas glows faintly from coals, charms swaying, pendants brushing the fabric, crosses glinting dimly. Soldiers' faces shine with sweat and soot, eyes half closed yet drawn toward these small objects, as if checking they remain in place. Outside, the wind rattles the ropes, but inside is the fragile comfort of belief, strung between each man like thread. Your hand still touches the little cloth knot. Perhaps it does nothing. Perhaps it holds no real power. Yet belief itself is powerful. In the cold night, when all else seems hostile, even the smallest superstition can feel like a shield. You inhale deeply, clutching this thought like a blanket, and drift into uneasy sleep, protected not by walls or warmth, but by faith, yours or someone else's. Morning comes with the gentle weight of something warm against your side. Not another soldier, but something soft, furred. You turn to find the camp dog curled against you, nose tucked into its tail, breathing in quiet puffs. It has slipped in during the night, choosing your corner of the tent. For a moment, the cold fades, replaced by the steady warmth of its small body. Chroniclers note that animals roamed freely through medieval camps, dogs being the most common companions. They scavenged scraps, guarded supplies, and followed soldiers as if tethered by invisible strings. In cold nights, they were not shooed away, but welcomed as sources of warmth and comfort. A dog offered more than companionship. It was a practical tool, a living heater on 4 legs. Marginal glimpses from history reveal soldiers giving dogs honorary roles. A Burgundian campaign account tells of a mutt named Captain, who slept in the commander's tent and barked to warn of approaching scouts. Another notes dogs wrapped in spare cloaks during sieges, their warmth treasured as much as loyalty. Yet historians debate how common this bond was. Some argue dogs were indispensable, constant companions to lonely soldiers. Others suggest their role was exaggerated, animals more nuisance than aid, stealing food and spreading fleas. Was the dog a comrade or just another mouth to feed in a crowded camp? As ever, the truth is uncertain. You stroke its coarse but comforting fur, inhaling its familiar scent. The faint smell of smoke and scraps of meat pervades the camp, but the warmth beside you is undeniable. You can feel the steady thump of the dog's heartbeat, faster than yours yet rhythmic like a drum. The dog shifts closer, as if understanding the unspoken bargain. It provides warmth and, in return, receives shelter. Around you, the other men notice. One mutters jealously, claiming you've claimed the best blanket in the camp. Another chuckles softly, remarking that the dog is wiser than many soldiers for finding the coziest spot. A third tosses a piece of bread across the tent, which the animal catches without lifting its head. In that dim light, the dog becomes more than just an animal. It becomes a bridge, connecting weary men in quiet amusement. The tent's usual odors are softened by the dog's presence. The musky scent of fur mixes with the wool, almost masking the sharper tang of sweat and smoke. You breathe in and, for a brief moment, imagine a hearth, a village home, a life where warmth is given freely rather than fought for in the cold. Picture the scene. The dog curled into a tight circle, soldiers huddled under cloaks, eyes half closed, all sharing the fragile cocoon of heat. Outside, the canvas flutters in the wind, yet inside, the dog anchors the group. It is a subtle reminder that not everything in war is bleak. Even in the coldest night, loyalty can curl beside you and keep you alive. You rest your hand on the dog's flank, feeling its chest rise and fall, its warmth seeping into your bones. Perhaps it is no miracle, just shared body heat. But in the middle of a freezing campaign, it feels extraordinary. Your breathing aligns with the animals and slowly, you drift into a sleep deeper than any before, as though survival tonight has arrived on a wagging tail and a quiet sigh. Morning seems slow to come, but this time you awaken not to cold or discomfort, but to silence. The dog has shifted away. The fire outside has died down, and within the tent, the usual chorus of mutters and snores has vanished. Only stillness remains, broken occasionally by the canvas snapping as wind tugs at the ropes. It takes a moment to understand why. The commanders have ordered quiet. No songs, no chatter, no prayers spoken too loudly, only deliberate silence. Military ordinances show that discipline extended into the night. Soldiers were warned against noise, both to maintain order and to prevent enemy scouts from detecting the camp. Silence became a survival tool, enforced as rigorously as any ration or drill. A noisy camp might comfort its men but risked exposing their position. Quiet tents meant safety, though the hush weighed heavily on every ear. Yet exceptions existed. Some armies developed subtle signals, whispers, tongue clicks, or small taps against shields, allowing communication without raising voices. Imagine lying awake, hearing not words but faint taps meaning all clear, or hisses warning of danger. These small sounds became the lullabies of discipline, reminding soldiers that silence was vigilance, not neglect. Historians differ on how strictly these rules were enforced. Some argue commanders punished laughter and chatter harshly, while others suggest that outside enemy proximity, soldiers often ignored the orders and filled tents with noise. Was enforced silence universal, or an idealized version scribes wanted readers to believe? The answer likely shifted with every commander and every night. You lie listening to the absence of sound. No snoring, no coughing, no whispered songs. The tent feels almost eerie. Your own heartbeat sounds loud in the stillness. The dog stirs quietly, its tail brushing the ground, yet even that seems amplified. You turn carefully, trying not to rustle your cloak, but the faint scrape of fabric is sharp, almost a blade against stone. The air is dense with the tension of enforced quiet, each small noise magnified in the void. The only thing keeping soldiers alive in these tents is the strange blend of smells surrounding them. Looted fabrics carry a faint, lingering scent. Unlike the smoky, sweat-soaked odor of wool, these remnants might hint at lavender or rose water, once infused in some distant chamber. The aroma is subtle now, barely detectable, yet enough to remind you that this blanket once belonged to a gentler, quieter life. The contrast is striking. Fine material crumpled into mud, delicate threads repurposed to shield against brutal cold. Picture the tent at first light, a patchwork of survival. One man is wrapped in looted velvet, another curled on a rough pelt, a third shivers beneath only his cloak. Helmets and gambesons lie scattered, doubled as pillows and mattresses. A blanket draped across two men stands out like a jewel in the mud, a testament to plunder's role in sustaining armies. Close your eyes and imagine how many soldiers before you slept on stolen treasures. Curtains, rugs, altar cloths, all torn from their original homes to serve as bedding in the dark. War doesn't just take lives. It steals comfort and transforms it. Tonight, you lie among fragments of other people's homes, awkwardly stitched into your own fragile survival. The stolen blanket doesn't reach you, so you settle back onto your corner of straw. Crackles under your weight, dry stalks snapping faintly. The sound is oddly comforting. At least the straw isn't damp. Running your hand across it, you feel the rough ends prick your skin. Yet even this scratchiness is better than lying directly on frozen ground. Medieval records show straw was the standard bedding whenever possible. Bundles were cut from nearby fields, brought into tents, and spread under cloaks as crude insulation. Chroniclers note that during sieges, entire wagon loads of straw were requisitioned specifically for bedding. Without it, the earth drew heat away too quickly, leaving men stiff, shivering, sometimes with hair frozen to the ground. Yet soldiers found ways to improve it. Some stuffed straw into sacks and sewed the tops to create rough mattresses. Others layered rushes or dried reeds carefully, pointing the sharp ends downward. Archaeological evidence suggests that in some areas, straw was replaced with bracken or pine needles, chosen for their faint, pleasant aroma when crushed. Imagine the irony. Your tent reeks of smoke and sweat, but shifting on your bed releases a soft woodland scent. Specialists still debate straw's effectiveness. If replaced often, it trapped air between stalks and insulated well. When damp, however, it quickly became useless, molding and attracting vermin. Whether straw offered genuine comfort or only the illusion of it depended entirely on how frequently it could be refreshed, which in wartime was rarely enough. You stretch, feeling the uneven padding beneath. Some stalks poke sharply, others cushion your joints. The texture never becomes soft, but dulls the earth's ache just enough. Around you, men shift in their own straw piles, uneven and trampled. One mutters as he plucks a stalk from under his cloak, rubbing it like a talisman before discarding it. The smell of straw is dry, dusty, faintly sweet, mingling with harsher odors until the tent momentarily smells almost like a barn. You breathe it in, think of stables and animals bedded down, warm and safe, and envy them. Perhaps horses in deep straw stalls are more comfortable than the men meant to ride them. Picture the tent carefully. Cloaks sprawled on uneven straw piles, boots lined along the flap, gambesons tossed atop rushes. In the thin morning light, the straw glows faintly golden, a rare brightness against the gloom. Bits cling to clothing, sticking in hair and beards, a reminder of the humble, gritty reality of survival in war. Leaving men looking as if they had sprouted dry whiskers overnight. No one bothers to brush them away anymore. It has simply become part of camp life, a layer of discomfort so familiar it no longer prompts complaints. You curl onto your side, cheek pressed against the brittle stalks. They scratch, yet also support you, keeping your face from touching the cold mud. You sigh, grateful for even this thin barrier. Straw is no luxury, but it is enough. In a world of tents and freezing nights, enough is as close to comfort as you can find. Morning arrives harshly, bringing not warmth but a deeper cold that seems to have seeped into your very bones. You open your eyes to see your breath rising like smoke from a dying fire. Frost stiffens the tent walls, canvas crackling when touched, seems outlined in white crystals. Shifting your cloak, you find it frozen where it absorbed damp overnight, stiff as a plank, bending reluctantly with your movements. Accounts from winter campaigns report that frozen mornings were among the worst trials for medieval soldiers. Chroniclers describe tents coated in frost, ropes snapping under tension, and armor that had to be pried apart before it could be worn. Even horses stood covered in frost, their breath rising like steam in the pale dawn. Surviving these mornings required not strength, but sheer persistence, the ability to force a frozen body into motion. Some stories verge on the absurd if they weren't so miserable. Men sometimes woke to find their beards locked to their cloaks by ice crystals. Boots could stiffen overnight, standing upright like statues without feet inside. Picture stumbling from your tent, shaking a boot like a block of wood, cursing as you tried to soften the leather near the fire. Scholars debate how severely frost impacted armies. Some claim entire campaigns stalled because frozen armor and impassable roads made movement impossible. Others argue soldiers endured, slowed but unbroken. Were frozen mornings catastrophic or just another hardship? The evidence remains inconclusive. You sit up slowly, cloak crackling as you pull it from your shoulders. Your fingers ache, stiff and clumsy, fumbling with frozen tunic ties. Around you, the tent stirs with groans and curses. One man shakes his straw bedding, sending up a faint shower of frost. Another rubs his hands frantically, blowing into them and muttering prayers through chattering teeth. In this light, everyone appears older, their faces gray and hollowed, eyes squinting against a pale sun that offers no warmth. The camp smells differently in the frost. Smoke hangs sharp and acrid, fire struggling even to burn. Sweat's usual stench is muted, replaced by the clean bite of cold, with a faint trace of sour, frozen wool beneath it. You draw a deep breath, lungs stinging, coughing against the raw air, and picture crawling toward the tent flap. Outside, the ground glimmers silver, every blade of grass rimed with frost. Armor lies scattered, helmets and breastplates glazed in thin ice, reflecting morning light. Horses stamp and snort, their breath steaming. Fires sputter as men crouch low, coaxing embers back to life with trembling hands. It looks less like an army than a field of statues slowly stirring. You force yourself to your feet, joints stiff, movements reluctant. Your boots crack faintly as you walk. Lifting a gauntlet from the ground, you nearly drop it, shocked by how bitterly it bites your skin. The metal feels more like a weapon than armor, wounding the wearer before any enemy arrives. You blow into it, rub it with your cloak, trying anything to soften its cruel chill. Others wage the same quiet battles, warming swords by the fire, tugging stiff straps into place. Shaking frost from cloaks, silence hangs heavily over the camp. The cold steals words as easily as it steals warmth. Only the cracking of ice, the hiss of breath, and the groans of men pushing themselves upright break the stillness. Yet life persists. Someone jokes about statues coming to life, and a faint ripple of laughter passes through the soldiers. Another, desperate, sets frozen boots too close to the fire, producing smoke and drawing curses and jeers. These small moments of absurdity pierce the silence, proof that men can still laugh even with chattering teeth. You pull your cloak tighter, watching the pale sun rise reluctantly. It gives light but no warmth, casting the frost in glittering patterns that almost seem beautiful, if beauty could exist alongside numb fingers and aching lungs. You sigh, shoulders heavy, bracing for another day. Frozen mornings may stiffen armor and crack cloaks, but they cannot stop the march. That bitter realization is the only warmth you carry until nightfall. The frozen dawn is still young when the command comes, march. You groan with the others, dragging your stiff body upright, wrapping your cloak tightly, and stepping into the brittle air. Every movement feels foreign, as if your joints are rusted hinges. The ground crunches beneath your boots, each step a reminder that warmth remains hours away, if it comes at all. Chroniclers often note that medieval armies rarely rested long. After freezing nights, soldiers had to rise and march, armor clanking, tents packed, wagons creaking. Men barely able to bend their legs hobbled forward as commanders barked them into formation. Endurance wasn't only surviving the night. It was rising again at dawn and moving, no matter how broken the body felt. Stranger methods emerge in the records. Some men rubbed snow on their faces in the morning to shock themselves awake. Brutal but effective, the sting forced blood to flow, jolting the body into motion. Imagine stumbling from your tent, half dead with exhaustion, and slapping your cheeks with a handful of snow. It sounds like torture, but it was better than collapsing before the march began. Historians debate how soldiers managed these daily ordeals. Some argue that the rhythm of shouted orders, drum beats, and marching columns carried men forward whether they wished it or not. Others note stragglers falling behind, harassed by commanders to keep pace. Morning discipline may have been strict in theory, but ragged in practice. You shoulder your bundle, cloak and gambeson pressing heavily, and join the shuffle leaving camp. The fire smolders behind you. The dog trots at the column's edge. Tents collapse, frost crackling as canvas folds. The air feels sharper outside, filled with cold earth and smoke clinging to hair. Breath rises from hundreds of men, steaming like fog above the line of march. Your feet ache with each step, boots rubbing raw skin, bodies stiff from sleeping half-frozen. Yet the sound of movement grows, boots crunching, armor groaning, voices muttering. The rhythm drags you forward, each step carrying you farther from rest, closer to whatever lies ahead. The march stretches endlessly. Ahead, cloaks hunched against wind, spears bobbing like dead grass. Behind, the same sight extends to the horizon. Occasionally, a horse snorts, hooves striking frost-hardened soil, a reminder that animals suffer too. Your stomach growls, your throat burns from dry air, yet still you walk. And here, this is where the absurdity begins. Soldiers joke even in the coldest moments. One complains that his legs feel like frozen logs. Another replies that at least logs burn warmer. Laughter ripples along the line, weak but genuine. Someone starts humming an off-key, dragging tune, and others join. Their voices mix with the crunch of boots on frost. The song isn't cheerful, but it carries them forward. The landscape drifts by slowly. Each mile is a blur of frostbitten trees, gray sky, and pale earth. Cloaks flap stiffly, edges frozen into jagged waves. You glance at your comrades. Pale faces, cracked lips, eyes rimmed red from the wind, but jaws set with determination. The march is misery, but movement is survival. By the time the sun rises, weak and watery, hours have passed. Your body feels foreign. Numb feet, aching shoulders, a back bent under layers. Yet the numbness becomes a kind of armor. Pain dulls, replaced by rhythm. Left foot, right foot. Inhale, exhale. The world narrows to this cycle until it becomes almost meditative. Walking reveals the secret of surviving medieval campaigns. Not just enduring a frozen night, but facing the icy morning after. When every instinct urges you to lie down and give up, you rise. You walk. You let the rhythm carry you, even when you feel frozen inside. By midday, the march carries you into a different landscape, though the cold persists. You notice that not every army faced the same hardships. Soldiers across Europe brought their own winter gear and fabric traditions. Some suited to their climates, others less so. That night, lying in your tent, you reflect on these differences. Surviving records show clear regional contrasts. In Northern Europe, wool dominated. Thick cloaks, layered hoods, mittens stitched from felted scraps. Chroniclers in Flanders described men wrapped so densely that snow slid off like water. Soldiers from southern regions struggled in northern winters. Their lighter linen garments, ideal for Mediterranean breezes, became liabilities in ice and sleet. Some froze, unaccustomed to nights when the ground turned to stone. There were also clever improvisations. Men from colder regions sometimes stuffed boots with moss or sheep's wool, a trick learned from shepherds. Italians campaigning in the Alps layered spare shirts beneath armor, several thin fabrics instead of one heavy cloak. Imagine peeling off 5 damp linen shirts at dawn, each heavier with frost, yet clung to because even frozen linen was better than nothing. Modern specialists debate the value of these regional practices. Some argue that cultural clothing gave soldiers an edge in foreign climates. Scots and Norsemen faring better in damp winters than soldiers from warmer coasts. Others claim that once on campaign, everyone suffered equally. Wet wool is wet wool regardless of origin. Did tradition shape survival, or was it erased by mud and frost? The debate continues. You lie back, considering your cloak, thick but itchy, smelling of smoke. Elsewhere, men wore cloaks dyed bright red or green, some trimmed with fur, some family heirlooms believed to carry ancestral strength. Others were stolen, looted from villages, their origins forgotten the moment they wrapped around shivering bodies. In war, the identity of fabric mattered less than its ability to block the wind. Even within your own tent, variety abounds. One soldier wears a cloak patched with stiff, shiny leather. Another clings to a blanket striped with colors. In a dim, cold tent, each soldier arranges himself differently. One wraps lightly, another layers so thick he almost disappears beneath the fabric. The patchwork of cloth tells stories, where the men came from, what they carried into this frozen campaign. Each fabric carries its own scent. Wet wool smells heavy and sour, linen sharp and grassy, fur musky and animal-like. Together, these smells create an atmosphere like a map of Europe made of odor instead of borders. Breathing it in, you feel surrounded not just by soldiers, but by the continent itself. From above, the camp looks scattered, tents spread across frost. Inside, men are wrapped in the traditions of their homeland. Some huddle under bright Flemish wool, others pull light Spanish cloaks tightly around themselves. A few rely on patched tunics, while others burrow under velvet-soft furs. On the battlefield, nationality fades, but at night, every stitch of fabric reminds you of where you were born. You pull your cloak tighter, realizing survival depends not only on wool and straw but on centuries of cultural tradition. Tonight, you share the struggles of men from distant lands, all wrapped in the patchwork quilt of Europe's fabrics. The frost barely leaves the ground when you sense a new hardship, worse than marching. A siege. A camp outside city walls is no brief discomfort. It is weeks or months of waiting in damp trenches and dripping tents, with cold pressing relentlessly. Here, the tent is less shelter than cage, trapping soldiers in cycles of smoke, mud, and boredom. Medieval chronicles tell of bitter winters during sieges, when men slept in fields churned into mud and slush. Soldiers dug shallow trenches, pitched tents on makeshift platforms, praying their shelters would survive storms. Records from the Siege of Torre in 1340 describe rows of tents collapsing under heavy snow, soldiers dragging themselves out half-frozen, only to crawl back beneath sagging canvas. Unlike marching campaigns, there was no escape, only endless nights of waiting for hunger or weather to weaken the enemy. Coping strategies could be extreme. At some sieges, men built raised wooden pallets, layering cloaks and hides like crude bunk beds to stay above flooded ground. Others piled straw knee-high, which rotted into swampy sludge after days of rain. The stench, wet straw, mold, and sweat, fermented until the air seemed poisonous. Scholars debate how sustainable siege life was. Some argue soldiers endured well, supported by supply lines and communal fires. Others contend that cold, disease, and filth were the real weapons, killing more than arrows ever could. Were tents genuine shelters, or merely symbols of routine in a world of misery? Evidence supports both, depending on who survived to recount it. You imagine yourself in such a tent, rain hammering the canvas night after night. Ropes creak, poles bow, water seeps through patched seams. Your damp cloak clings to your shoulders. The straw beneath has turned to black sludge. Each movement squelches. It is suffocating, as though the earth itself is swallowing you. Smells intensify. Acrid smoke trapped under the flap, mold from rotting straw, sweat from unwashed bodies pressed into the cramped space. The tent is no longer just uncomfortable. It feels like a living, oppressive weight pressing down from every side. Small a space, and it's easy to understand why men fell ill so quickly. Coughs pierce the night, rattling chests like drums of disease. The tent, meant to protect life, becomes a chamber where fever spreads faster than wildfire. Picture the camp outside. Rows of tents sagging under frost, trenches filled with brackish water. Soldiers stumble with buckets to empty them, only to see more water seep in. Fires smoke stubbornly, refusing to burn in damp wood. Horses huddle together, ribs visible, breath steaming into the gray air. From the walls above, defenders watch, aware that time and weather are already their enemies. And yet, even here, men find ways to cope. Some carve charms into tent poles, believing symbols of saints will keep the canvas upright. Others cluster in larger tents, sharing warmth and laughter, telling stories to drown out the sound of dripping water. One man boasts of sleeping 3 nights dry in a looted fur cloak, while another jokes that he'd trade his sword for a straw mattress that didn't rot beneath him. As you close your eyes again, listening to the wind howl across trenches, you realize that life under siege was as much a battle with nature as with enemies. Each night became an act of stubborn resistance. To lie in a leaking tent, to breathe the stench of rot, and still rise to face another day. Survival was measured not in victories, but in the will to endure the slow, icy grind of time. The cold of northern winters is one thing, but another kind of cold strikes unexpectedly in the desert night. Sand and sun bring scorching days, but when darkness falls, warmth disappears as if stolen by invisible hands. A chill sweeps over the camp, made sharper by the day's heat. Men who marched with sweat streaming now shiver beneath a canopy of stars. Accounts from crusading armies in the Levant and chronicles of Moorish campaigns in Spain describe soldiers struggling with these extreme swings in temperature. Cloaks soaked with sweat during the day hardened at night, trapping dampness against the skin. Fires were hard to keep, as dry desert winds devoured sparks, and would had to be scavenged or bought at great expense. What seemed like a land of blazing sun turned treacherous when the moon rose. Soldiers improvised in remarkable ways. They dug shallow pits in the sand, covering themselves with cloaks so the earth acted as insulation. Others slept beneath their shields, turning curved metal or wood into a roof against the cold. Some even claimed that burying their feet in warm sand before nightfall kept them comfortable until dawn, though this only worked if the desert retained the day's heat. Scholars debate whether these methods truly helped. Records show men freezing to death during desert campaigns, suggesting improvisations often failed. Yet the very survival of armies indicates these tactics had at least some effect. Were soldiers enduring, or simply gambling each night on luck? The answer lies as unevenly as their makeshift beds. Imagine lying in such a tent, its canvas straining against hot winds that suddenly turn icy. Sand creeps into every seam, filling boots and grinding between teeth. The stars above seem endless, sharp as frost, their beauty mocking your shivering body. Your cloak clings stiff with dried sweat, its sour smell intensified by the dry air. Around you, men cough harshly, throats raw from dust, voices brittle as parchment. The silence of the desert night differs from northern winds. There are no rustling trees or pattering rain, only vast emptiness, broken occasionally by a jackal's bark or the cry of a night bird. Every sound feels amplified. Footsteps crunching in sand, the hiss of a tent ropes creak, and the faint pop of a dying coal breaks the night. You pull your cloak tighter, but the cold slips beneath it like a snake, finding every gap. From above, the camp looks scattered, tents huddled like dark shells across pale dunes, each glowing dimly as men gather around fires of scavenged wood. Horses stand tethered, their bodies hunched, breaths fogging the dry air. The fires flicker weakly, their light swallowed by the vast desert. From afar, the army resembles a handful of fireflies trapped in an endless sea of sand. Despite the discomfort, laughter trickles through the tents. One soldier jokes he prefers the snow of home to this land, where one sweats and freezes in the same day. Another mutters that at least lice die faster in the dry air, prompting a brief burst of laughter. Survival is stitched together not just by cloaks and fires, but by humor, the last shield against despair. You close your eyes, sand scratching your cheek, stars glaring above. The cold seeps into your bones, but you tell yourself, the dawn will come, the sun will rise, heat will return. This cycle of burning days and freezing nights becomes a rhythm as relentless as northern frost, and in it, soldiers endure. The desert night leaves its mark. So do endless winters. Eventually, the body shows the cost of these campaigns. You wake one morning, Noticing the cough you heard in the tent last week has not gone away. It has multiplied. Men hack in the dark, chests rattling as though filled with gravel. You touch your throat, raw from smoke and frost, realizing that sickness is as constant as your cloak. Surviving letters and chronicles show how disease became inseparable from cold nights in camp. Pneumonia, fevers, frostbite. These spread faster than arrows. Minor chills could turn deadly when men slept damp night after night. A commander in the Baltic lamented that more soldiers were buried by ice and coughs than by enemy swords. Cold weakened bodies, and weakness invited sickness. A truth every army knew but could not escape. Then there were the stranger remedies soldiers tried. Some drank warm ale with garlic, believing it chased away chills. Others pressed hot stones wrapped in cloth to their chests, hoping heat would banish coughs. A few placed onion slices in their boots, convinced the fumes would cleanse their lungs. Imagine the smell inside a tent where smoke, sweat, and onions mingled into a suffocating haze. Modern researchers debate how devastating cold-induced illness truly was. Some argue it decimated armies, causing most casualties in harsh winters. Others suggest that soldiers hardened by exposure endured sickness better than assumed. Were camps graveyards of coughs, or did men exaggerate their suffering in letters and chronicles? The debate continues, echoing like the coughs themselves. You lie back, listening to the symphony of illness around you. A man on your left hacks violently, spitting into the straw. Another groans, clutching his chest, whispering that his ribs feel like knives. Someone sneezes, wet and explosive, cursing immediately afterward. The sounds layer over the crackle of the fire and the whistle of wind through the tent seams. The smell has shifted too. Smoke and will remain, but beneath them lingers the sour tang of sickness, phlegm, fever-soaked sweat, and the faint metallic scent of cracked lips. Each inhalation catches in your chest. The tent feels smaller, thickened by illness. Picture the camp in this state. Men huddled, coughing into cloaks, faces pale in the dim glow. Some cling to the fire, bodies shaking violently even near the coals. Horses, stamping uneasily. Aware that those around you are faltering, you look down on the camp from above. Rows of tents stretch out, smoke drifting upward. Inside, sickness moves silently, yet soldiers still find ways to joke. One man, coughing so violently he almost collapses, mutters that at least the enemy will smell his breath and flee. Another wheezes a song, each note broken by coughs, bringing weak laughter through the tent. Humor does not heal, but it eases despair, if only briefly. You draw your cloak tighter, pressing it against your mouth as though it could purify the air. Each breath aches in your chest, yet you tell yourself it's just smoke, just fatigue, not sickness. You close your eyes, but coughing continues, filling the tent like a second wind. In that uneasy rest, you grasp the truth every medieval soldier knew. Survival depended not only on warmth but on keeping illness at bay long enough to see another dawn. Coughs persist, yet sleep drags you under. In the darkness you dream of warmth. Not the real warmth of fire, cloaks, or furs, but the memory of it. The glow of a hearth at home, the smell of bread baking, the gentle weight of a feather mattress. You wake, painfully aware of the mind's cruelty. Comfort in dreams snatched away by a damp tent and freezing air. Medieval writings often mention soldiers' dreams and visions at night. Some claimed they dreamt of banquets so vivid they could taste the meat. Others saw mothers, wives, or sweethearts, whispering words that carried them through the cold. In the harshest campaigns, these memories sometimes outweighed reality. Some men swore they could smell home hearths amid the stench of smoke and straw. Odd fragments of folklore appear in the records too. Soldiers told of men dreaming not of food or warmth, but of strange fires that never died. Sacred flames following armies, promising survival. Some viewed these dreams as omens. Others dismissed them as fevered visions of half-frozen men. Imagine waking, sure you had felt a divine fire's warmth, only to find frostbite on your toes. Modern scholars debate the value of these dream accounts. Some see them as exaggerations or romanticized suffering by chroniclers. Others argue they reflect real psychological survival mechanisms, the brain conjuring warmth and abundance where the body lacks both. Were these dreams historical fact or metaphorical endurance? The question lingers like smoke in a closed tent. You pull your cloak tighter, eyes closed, trying to summon a memory of warmth, a fire from childhood, or the heavy quilt you once hid under during a storm. The harder you try, the more the present intrudes. Damp wool, aching joints, the cough of the man beside you. Memory flickers, unable to hold back the chill. Around you, the tent stirs with whispered dreams. One man murmurs about meat pies, lips smacking in sleep. Another repeats a woman's name until his voice breaks in sobs. Someone jolts awake from a nightmare, curses, while others groan at the disturbance. Dreams weave through the tent as tangibly as smoke, each mind crafting its fragile refuge. The air is thick, a mix of sweat, smoke, and the faint sweetness of crushed straw beneath restless bodies. You breathe shallowly, hoping the memory of warmth lingers. You realize survival here relies not just on cloaks or fire, but on the stubborn insistence of remembering warmth, even if only in sleep. From a distance, the camp stretches under the moonlight. A sprawl of tents, each sheltering a dozen men dreaming of fires that do not exist. Outside, frost sparkles on the ground. Inside, men twitch and murmur, holding on to illusions stronger than their tattered clothing. To an observer, it may seem like misery. To those inside, it is survival. You close your eyes, determined to preserve a scrap of warmth, even if it is imagined. Your mind drifts to firesides, to laughter around tables, to the glow of distant hearths. Though your body lies stiff and frozen on straw, your spirit rises momentarily in memory, borrowing comfort from a world far away. The dream fades, and when you open your eyes, you recognize a truth long felt. Survival in these tents has never depended solely on wool, fire, or straw. It has always been about the will to keep going when cold presses from every side. You look around and see men still breathing, still shifting beneath their cloaks. Endurance is as much mental as it is physical. Accounts from medieval campaigns emphasize that morale was as critical as food or fuel. Commanders noted that an army with warm cloaks but broken spirits could collapse faster than one half-starved but still laughing. Cold nights in tents tested both body and mind. Men had to convince themselves each morning that surviving was worth the effort. Sometimes they turned to unexpected methods. Soldiers shared jokes so absurd or crude that laughter froze on their cheeks. Others sang lullabies from childhood, voices cracking but determined. Some played simple games, tossing dice in the straw, scratching patterns into frost on the canvas walls. Anything to turn misery into routine. These small acts wove mental resilience that cloaks alone could not provide. Historians still debate what mattered more, physical survival strategies or psychological ones. Some argue no charm, song, or memory could fight frostbite. Others insist it was these fragile mental rituals that carried soldiers through, letting them rise at dawn and march again. Did men endure because their cloaks held, or because their minds refused to break? The answer remains elusive, like smoke escaping through a tent seam. You draw your cloak closer, not just against the cold, but as a shield around your thoughts. Bodies shift restlessly. One snores, another mutters a prayer, a third groans in sleep. The tent creaks under the wind, yet it holds. You close your eyes, breathing in smoke, wool, and dampness. None is pleasant, but all affirm that you are still here. Picture the camp at dawn. Fires gutter, smoke drifts thinly against pale light, horses stamp, their breath steaming. Men emerge from tents, shoulders hunched, eyes red, armor stiff with frost. From afar it seems misery. Up close, it is a miracle. These men endured. They slept half-frozen. They awoke aching, and still they rise. The true weapon against freezing has always been stubbornness. Cloaks tear, straw rots, fires sputter, but the will to move step by step, night after night, outlasts the cold. That is why medieval soldiers survived. Not because their tents were strong, but because their minds were stronger than frost. As you drift into sleep, imagine the flickering glow of a medieval campfire fading to embers. The tents stand low and weary, patched and sagging, yet still shelter bodies curled beneath cloaks. You hear the rhythm of snores, occasional coughs, whispers of prayers in smoky darkness. Outside, frost gathers silently on ropes and poles. Inside, men cling stubbornly to one another, to memories, to scraps of warmth. The story of how they slept. Wrapped in wool, pressed against comrades, guarded by fragile fires, and even by faith, reminds us that survival depends as much on the mind as on material protection. The story goes deeper than just military history. It reminds us that survival isn't about perfection. It's about finding just enough warmth, enough laughter, enough faith to make it through the night. Every droplet that seeped through the canvas, every flea that crawled across skin, every icy gust shaking the tent was a test. Yet, dawn always arrived and the soldiers always got up. Tonight, as you lie beneath your own blankets, imagine yourself inside that tent. You can feel the coarse wool against your cheek, hear the canvas strain against the wind, and sense the smoke seeping through the fabric. But alongside these discomforts, you also feel the quiet determination that held those men together. The refusal to surrender to the cold, the fragile courage of closing your eyes and trusting that morning will come. Let your breathing slow. Let your body sink deeper into softness. The cold, the noise, they belong to another time and place, far away from you. Now you are safe and the world outside can wait. Sleep like those soldiers once did, not in comfort, but in endurance, knowing that you have already survived the hardest night.